The grand chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars suspended from the high ceiling of the Whitmore mansion. Every corner of that house whispered wealth. Walls dressed with imported silk wallpapers, portraits of ancestors framed in gold, and marble floors polished enough to mirror one's soul. Yet, amidst all this grandeur, there walked a woman whose presence barely registered in the eyes of those who lived within these walls. Her name was Elena. To most, she was simply the Maid, clad in her maroon uniform and crisp white apron, with yellow gloves covering hands that scrubbed, washed, and polished. Elena's existence seemed to revolve around invisible duties. She was there when the mansion slept and there when it woke. She was there to arrange the cutlery with precision, to fold the napkins in swan shapes, to make sure the marble steps glistened without a single speck of dust. But what the household never truly noticed, at least not until much later, was her heart. Elena had come from humble beginnings. A village girl, raised by a mother who stitched clothes to earn pennies and a father who died before she learned to spell his name. For her, survival meant service, and the Whitmore family was just another chapter in that endless book of servitude. Yet in this house, things were different. There was a boy. Nathaniel Whitmore Jr., the only son of the millionaire industrialist, was no ordinary child. At 6 years old, he had everything money could buy: Italian toys, imported chocolates, and an army of tutors. But what he didn't have was a mother's love. Mrs. Whitmore Eleanor was a woman obsessed with social status and parties. She adored her gowns, her galas, and her endless travels. But motherhood to her was a decorative role, something to be mentioned in gossip columns but rarely lived. So Nathaniel found himself clinging to the only person who looked at him with gentleness, Elena. It began subtly. A bedtime glass of warm milk here, a soothing lullaby when he had nightmares, a gentle hand brushing his hair when the tutors made him cry. Elena didn't plan it. It was instinct. Every time Nathaniel's small hand reached for hers, she couldn't pull away. Every time his eyes watered with loneliness, she felt a tug deep inside her chest. "Miss Elena," he would say softly, though he knew she wasn't a miss of any kind. "Can you stay until I sleep?" And she would. Sometimes hours passed before she slipped out of his room, tiptoeing back into the invisibility that the mansion demanded of her. But Nathaniel wasn't the only one watching. One evening, during a glittering dinner party, Elena stood quietly at the back of the hall. The Whitmore family was hosting business associates from across the city. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and chandeliers blazed. Elena carried trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres, careful not to draw attention. Yet Nathaniel, dressed in a miniature tuxedo, spotted her. His eyes lit up. Breaking free from the grip of his governess, he dashed across the polished floor, tugging at her apron. "Elena! Did you bring my bedtime storybook?" His innocent voice rang out across the room, startling the guests into silence. Every head turned. Eleanor Whitmore's painted smile stiffened. Mr. Whitmore's brows furrowed, and then came the unthinkable. Nathaniel looked up at Elena, holding her hand tightly, and in front of the entire hall of aristocrats, he whispered the word that would change everything. "Mother." Gasps rippled through the guests. The orchestra faltered. Eleanor nearly dropped her champagne glass. Elena froze. Her eyes welled with tears she didn't understand. She wanted to speak, to explain, to deny. But Nathaniel's small, trembling hand gripped hers tighter, as if he'd finally spoken a truth he had hidden for too long. The silence was shattered by the booming voice of Mr. Whitmore. "What did you just call her, Nathaniel?" He stood up, his face flushed with anger, pointing a finger at Elena as if she had orchestrated this humiliation. She is not your mother," his voice roared, echoing through the hall. The guests watched with wide eyes, whispering, scandal dripping from their lips. Eleanor stepped forward, her face pale with fury, while Nathaniel clung even harder to Elena's skirt, defiant in the way only a child could be. "She's my mother," he cried, his voice breaking, his cheeks red with emotion. "She loves me. She cares for me. More than anyone else here." The hall erupted in murmurs. Elena's tears finally spilled, not because of fear of her employer's wrath, but because Nathaniel had spoken aloud the bond they had silently shared. But in the world of millionaires, love was never simple. Mr. Whitmore's finger still jabbed at her, sharp as a knife. His face twisted with rage. "You dare!" he spat. "You dare to poison my son's mind? You dare to disgrace this family in front of our guests?" Elena trembled, caught between shame and love. She wanted to explain that she never tried to take anyone's place, that she never wanted this moment to come. But how could she explain the kind of love that blossoms without asking permission? The room, heavy with scandal, waited for her to speak, and so began a storm that would either destroy her life or change it forever. The Whitmore mansion was never quiet after a scandal, not even at night. Gossip lingered in its corridors like smoke after a fire, curling through the servants' quarters, drifting into the study where Mr. Whitmore paced, and settling into the drawing room where Eleanor Whitmore seethed with humiliation. For Elena, that night was a storm of fear. She sat alone on her narrow bed in the servants' wing, her apron still folded neatly on the chair, her hands trembling in her lap. The memory of Nathaniel's voice, "Mother," echoed endlessly in her mind. She had never asked for such words, never dared to dream of them. Yet when they came, they pierced her heart with both sweetness and terror. Nathaniel, however, slept peacefully that night. Safe in his nursery, he clutched the small wooden horse Elena had carved for him during one winter evening. His lips curled in a faint smile, as though he had finally spoken the truth he had been carrying for years. But the adults were not at peace. The confrontation, in the grand study, Mr. Whitmore's voice thundered against the polished oak walls. "She will not step foot in this house again," he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. Papers scattered. His face burned red with fury, his tie loosened as if rage alone had strangled him. Eleanor, still in her evening gown, stood near the fireplace, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. "Do you even realize what people will say?" she hissed. "At tonight's party alone, half the city's elite were present. Tomorrow the newspapers will be full of whispers. Our son calling a maid his mother." Her voice cracked, half rage, half fear of losing the pristine image she had so carefully cultivated. Mr. Whitmore turned sharply. "That woman manipulated him." She must have whispered lies into his ears, filled his head with nonsense. "I'll have her dismissed before sunrise." But Eleanor, though furious, hesitated. Her sharp blue eyes narrowed. And what if he refuses to let her go? The question hung in the air like an uninvited ghost. Mr. Whitmore froze. His anger faltered, replaced by a silence that admitted an unspoken truth. Nathaniel adored Elena. Removing her would not be as simple as dismissing another servant. The servants whispered downstairs. In the servants' quarters, the others whispered of the scene. "I heard it myself," muttered Clara, the cook, as she stirred the evening broth. "The boy called her mother in front of everyone." A butler shook his head gravely. "This won't end well. Mr. Whitmore values reputation above all. Mark my words, Elena's days here are numbered." But another maid, younger and kinder, frowned. "And what of the boy? He clings to her like a shadow. If they force her to leave—" She trailed off, unwilling to imagine Nathaniel's grief. Elena, sitting quietly in the corner, said nothing. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red. She had heard enough whispers to know her fate. Nathaniel's defiance morning came too soon. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, gilding the mansion in gold, but the air was thick with tension. At breakfast, Nathaniel sat at the long dining table, his tiny legs swinging beneath the chair. His father sat across from him, his mother at the head. Silverware clinked, but silence stretched heavy between them. Finally, Mr. Whitmore spoke, his voice firm and cold. "Nathaniel, from today you will not see Elena again. She is a servant, nothing more. You must understand that." The boy froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. His wide eyes filled with confusion first, then hurt. Slowly he set the spoon down and looked at his father. "No," he said softly. The word was small, but it carried the weight of defiance. "What did you say?" Mr. Whitmore's voice sharpened. "I said no." Nathaniel's voice trembled but did not break. You can take away my toys, my tutors, even lock me in my room, but you can't take her. She's my mother. She loves me. You don't! Eleanor gasped, nearly dropping her teacup. Mr. Whitmore's face turned the color of storm clouds. Enough, he bellowed, his fist slamming the table so hard the cutlery rattled. But Nathaniel stood, his small hands balled into fists, his eyes brimming with tears. You don't get to tell me who my mother is. I know what love feels like. And she's the only one who gives it to me. With that, he stormed out of the dining hall, leaving silence heavier than any words behind him. Elena's decision. By midday, Elena was summoned. She entered the study, her head bowed, her apron freshly pressed. Mr. Whitmore sat at the desk, his face like stone, while Eleanor stood behind him, arms crossed. Elena, Mr. Whitmore said icily, you have overstepped your position. My son has mistaken your duties for affection, and you have encouraged this fantasy. For the good of this household and for your own sake, you must leave. Elena's heart sank, though she had expected nothing less. She opened her mouth to protest, to explain that she never planted the idea in Nathaniel's head. But Eleanor's sharp voice cut her off. You think you're clever? Playing the role of savior to a lonely child? Do you know what you've done to our reputation? Tears stung Elena's eyes, but she held her ground. I never meant harm, she whispered. All I did was care for him. When he was lonely, I comforted him. When he cried, I listened. If love is a crime, then I am guilty. Mr. Whitmore's jaw tightened. He stood, walking around the desk until he loomed over her. You will leave this mansion tonight. Do not think for a moment you can return. Elena lowered her gaze, her hands trembling. She thought of Nathaniel, of his small hand clutching hers, of his innocent eyes shining with trust. Leaving would break his heart. But what choice did she have against such power? The promise, that evening, as Elena packed her few belongings into a small bag, Nathaniel slipped into the servants' wing. His face was flushed from crying, his hair disheveled. Where are you going? His voice was desperate, panicked. Elena knelt, pulling him into her arms. Nathaniel, listen to me. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions we cannot change. No! He cried, clinging to her neck. You can't leave me. You promised. You said you'd always be here. Her tears fell freely now. I never wanted to leave, but you must be strong. Promise me you'll remember this. No matter where I am, I love you. Always. The boy shook his head, his small fists pounding against her shoulders. If you go, I'll never forgive them. I'll never forgive anyone who takes you away. Before Elena could answer, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Mr. Whitmore's stern voice called her name. Panic filled the room. Elena pulled Nathaniel close one last time, whispering into his ear, One day the truth will shine. One day they will know why you called me mother. And then she stood, wiped her tears, and walked toward her fate. But the Whitmore mansion, though gilded in gold, was built on secrets, and secrets have a way of clawing their way into the light. This was not the end of Elena's story. It was only the beginning. The Whitmore mansion had always been a palace of glass, shining on the outside, fragile within. But after Elena's departure, its walls seemed colder, its air heavier. Chandeliers still sparkled, guests still arrived for dinners, and business continued to flourish. Yet an invisible emptiness crept into every corner. For Nathaniel, that emptiness was unbearable. Nathaniel's silence. In the days following Elena's dismissal, the boy withdrew into himself. He refused his tutors, ignored his toys, and pushed away even the servants who tried to comfort him. He sat for hours by the tall nursery window, staring out at the road beyond the gates as if waiting for someone who might return. At meals, he ate little. At night, he cried quietly into his pillow, muffling the sobs so his father wouldn't hear. But the governesses heard, and they whispered among themselves, "The boy is heartbroken." "He's not the same." Eleanor dismissed their worries. "Children are dramatic," she scoffed. "He'll forget her soon enough." But Nathaniel did not forget. Every morning he touched the wooden horse Elena had carved for him, running his fingers over its rough edges. Every night he whispered into the darkness, "Good night, Mother," as though the word itself could keep her close. Elena's struggle. Meanwhile, Miles away in a modest boarding house, Elena adjusted to her new reality. She found work in a small laundry shop, scrubbing clothes until her hands bled. The pay was meager, the hours long, but she bore it silently. Yet no matter how hard she tried to bury herself in labor, memories of Nathaniel haunted her. His laughter, his little questions, his soft hand in hers, each memory was a dagger of longing. Often she would pass the Whitmore gates on her way home, her heart aching as she gazed at the towering mansion. She knew he was inside, lonely and confused, perhaps calling for her in vain. But she dared not approach. The guards had strict orders. Still, she whispered into the night, as if the wind might carry her words. "Be strong, my son. One day we'll meet again." The father's battle mister. Whitmore, though outwardly firm, was troubled. He told himself he had done the right thing, removed a dangerous influence from his son's life. Yet deep inside, guilt gnawed at him. He had seen the way Nathaniel looked at Elena, with love so pure it could not have been manufactured. One evening, as he returned from a late meeting, he paused outside Nathaniel's room. Through the half-open door, he saw his son kneeling by the bed, whispering softly, "Please, God." "Bring her back," the words pierced him. He closed the door silently and walked away, but the prayer followed him like a shadow. The mother's jealousy, Eleanor, however, was fueled by a different emotion. Jealousy. Though she had never given Nathaniel true affection, she despised the fact that he had given that sacred word mother to someone else. At luncheons, when her friends teased her about the Maid scandal, she laughed it off with practiced grace. But at night, when she looked in the mirror, she saw not a glamorous socialite, but a woman who had been replaced in her son's heart. Her anger grew not only toward Elena, but toward her own child. She became colder, harsher, scolding Nathaniel for the smallest mistakes. "Stop sulking!" she snapped one afternoon when he refused to practice piano. "You embarrass me with your childish tantrums." Nathaniel said nothing. He simply turned his face away, silent tears sliding down his cheeks. The breaking point months passed. Nathaniel's health began to suffer. He grew pale and thin, plagued by fevers that no medicine seemed to cure. Doctors came and went, prescribing tonics and rest, but none could heal the wound in his heart. One stormy night, when thunder rattled the mansion, Nathaniel collapsed in the hallway. Servants rushed to his side, carrying him to bed. Eleanor panicked, while Mr. Whitmore summoned the best physician in the city. The doctor examined him carefully, then pulled Mr. Whitmore aside. "His illness is not of the body, but of the spirit," he said gravely. "The boy suffers from grief. If he continues like this, he may not recover." Mr. Whitmore's face went pale. For the first time, his power and wealth meant nothing. He could buy medicine, but he could not buy love. That night, he sat by his son's bed, watching the boy toss and turn in fevered dreams. Nathaniel murmured one word again and again, his lips trembling even in sleep. "Mother. Mother." The sound broke him. A father's dilemma. The next morning, Mr. Whitmore stood in his study, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. His pride battled with his conscience. To bring Elena back would be an admission of failure, a scandal, a blow to his authority. Yet to keep her away might mean losing his son forever. Eleanor stormed in, her voice sharp. "You're not seriously considering it, are you? Bringing that woman back?" Mr. Whitmore turned, his eyes cold. "Our son is dying, Eleanor. Do you not see it?" She scoffed. "He's weak because you allow him to be. He will outgrow this foolish attachment if we let him." But Mr. Whitmore's patience snapped. "Outgrow it? He calls for her even in his fever. Tell me, Eleanor, when was the last time he called for you?" Her face blanched, but she said nothing. The journey that evening, under the cover of darkness, Mr. Whitmore ordered his carriage prepared. Alone, without informing Eleanor, he rode through the rain-slicked streets to the humble boarding house where Elena lived. She was surprised when she opened the door, her eyes widening at the sight of the man who once banished her. She looked thinner, her hands rough from labor, yet her presence still radiated quiet strength. "Mr. Whitmore?" she whispered. He removed his hat, his face heavy with guilt. "Elena," he said quietly, "my son needs you. He's dying without you." Her breath caught. Tears filled her eyes. For a moment she could not speak, her heart torn between anger and longing. "Please," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice breaking with rare humility. "Come back. Not as a servant. Not as a maid. Come back as the only one who can save him." Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. She had dreamed of returning, but never like this. And so, with trembling steps, she gathered her shawl and followed him into the night, back toward the mansion where love, scandal, and destiny awaited. The Whitmore mansion looked the same as it always had, grand, glittering, intimidating. But that night, as Elena stepped across its marble floors once more, everything felt different. She was no longer a maid with her head bowed. She was a woman carrying the weight of love and the fragile hope of saving a child's life. The servants gasped when they saw her. Some clasped their hands in relief, others whispered in awe. But Elena didn't hear them. Her eyes were fixed on one destination, the nursery. The reunion, Nathaniel lay pale and frail beneath the heavy quilts, his little chest rising and falling weakly. A fever glazed his forehead. His lips moved with whispered words only he could hear. "Elena," he murmured, tossing in his sleep. "Mother." Elena's tears fell before she reached him. She rushed to his bedside, falling to her knees, taking his small hand in hers. "I'm here, Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mother's here." His eyelids fluttered open. For a moment he blinked, unsure if it was a dream. Then recognition filled his eyes, and his lips curved into the faintest smile. "You came back," he breathed weakly. "Yes," Elena said, pressing his hand to her cheek. "I'll never leave you again." At that moment, as if love itself were medicine, Nathaniel's breathing steadied. His fever, though not gone, seemed to loosen its grip. For the first time in weeks, he slept peacefully, his hand clutching hers even in dreams. A household divided. When Eleanor Whitmore entered and saw the scene, her face turned to ice. "You brought her back?" she shrieked at her husband, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "After everything, after the humiliation, you dare?" Mr. Whitmore stood tall, though his eyes softened as he looked at his son. "Yes, Eleanor, I dared. Because our son needs her more than he needs either of us." Eleanor's face flushed with rage. "She's a servant, a nobody. How dare she take my place?" Elena, still kneeling by Nathaniel's side, looked up. Her voice was calm but steady. "I never wanted to take your place, madam. I only gave him what he was missing, love. If that is a crime, then punish me. But don't punish him." The words struck like arrows. For the first time, Eleanor faltered. Her painted face cracked with something she rarely allowed herself to feel: shame. She turned and stormed out, her heels echoing angrily against the marble floors. The truth revealed. In the days that followed, Nathaniel's health improved steadily under Elena's care. She fed him, sang to him, told him stories until laughter returned to his lips. The mansion, once suffocating, now breathed again with warmth, but whispers began to circulate, not only among the servants, but beyond the mansion walls. Society's elite gossiped endlessly. The Whitmore's son calls the maid his mother. Yet instead of disgrace, a strange admiration began to stir. People spoke of Elena's devotion, of the boy's miraculous recovery. And then, one evening, Mr. Whitmore made a revelation that shocked even Elena. He summoned her to the study, his face solemn. "There is something you must know," he said quietly. "Something I should have told you long ago." He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a birth certificate. Elena's eyes widened as she read the name: Nathaniel Alexander Whitmore. Mother, Elena Grace. Father, Nathaniel Whitmore Sr. Her breath caught. Her knees nearly buckled. "What? What is this?" she whispered. Mr. Whitmore lowered his gaze. "Before I married Eleanor, there was you. Do you remember? You worked at my late mother's estate. We shared something? I was too much a coward to face it then. When I learned you were with child, His voice broke. I sent you away, paid you to disappear, but fate brought you back into his life. Elena's tears fell freely, but not just from sorrow, also from relief. The bond she felt with Nathaniel had not been an illusion. It was blood, you mean, she whispered. I really am his mother? Mr. Whitmore nodded slowly. Yes, and the boy, in his innocent heart, knew the truth all along. The transformation. From that day, Elena was no longer treated as a servant. She was acknowledged, quietly at first, then openly, as Nathaniel's rightful mother. Though society still gossiped, the Whitmores could no longer deny what was written in both paper and heart. Nathaniel thrived. With Elena by his side, his laughter returned, his health restored. He clung to her proudly, no longer ashamed to call her mother before anyone. As for Eleanor, she withdrew from public life, her pride wounded beyond repair. Some said she left the mansion altogether, retreating to Europe. Others whispered she stayed, but as a ghost of her former self. Either way, she was no longer the center of Nathaniel's world. The promise fulfilled one golden afternoon. Months later, Elena stood in the garden, watching Nathaniel chase butterflies with a joy she thought she'd never see again. He ran back to her, breathless, his small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. Mother, he said, smiling up at her. You'll never leave me again, right? Elena knelt, cupping his face in her hands, her heart brimming with love. Never, she promised. I'll always be here, for as long as I breathe. And this time, it wasn't just a promise whispered in the dark. It was the truth, sealed not only by love, but by destiny itself. Epilogue years later, when Nathaniel grew into a young man, he often told the story of how the world once called her just a maid. But to him, she was always his mother, the one who had saved his life, his heart, and his soul. And so, the Whitmore mansion, once a place of cold grandeur, became a home where love reigned above all. Because sometimes, the greatest titles are not given by wealth or society, they are spoken by the innocent lips of a child.